I have decided to start recording these lessons rather than just writing it all out on slides because it'll be easier to explain as we get into more advanced topics and we'll have a better record. So today we're going to be doing if-else statements and loops. So to start with if statements, what these do is they look at a condition given inside of a set of parentheses, and if the condition is true, it'll go and execute whatever code you have inside of the related brackets. And if it's not, it'll just go to the next line of code outside of the brackets. So let's say if we have an integer x is 3, we can write an if statement that says if x is greater than 0, and then we put our brackets. Just print, let's say 1, just as an example. So this is highlighted as an error because this is always true. But if we were to take input here, then this wouldn't be highlighted. And that's how an if statement works. Pretty simple. If we add another layer in the form of an else statement. So these always need to be placed after an if statement, and we'll execute the code in its brackets if the if statement failed. So here, if our statement was, say, x less than 0, that would not be true. So if then we put an else statement, it'll now go into this else statement between these brackets and say print out -1. But sometimes you want something more complicated to check more than one thing in a certain order without doing every single one in this alone if statement. In that case, you would use an else if statement, which also needs to either be placed after an if statement or another else if statement. And what these will do is they will check the condition in the parentheses if the condition of the above if statement failed. And if then the else if statement's condition is true, it will execute the code inside of the brackets. So if we were to make this example, we would, instead of having an else statement here, have an else if statement. And now once this fails, it'll go here and then check this condition, which we could put x greater than 0. And then it'll do whatever code you have here. We'll keep it the same as just printing out -1. And you can stack more of these else if statements just as much as you want. And normally you'll probably end it out with an else statement that will normally print out like none of this worked, the test case is invalid or something. So our next thing is going to be loops, which instead of executing a bit of code over and over, if you know how long you want to execute it or until what point you want to execute it, you can put it in a loop. So the first type of loop is a for loop, which will execute the code inside of the brackets based off of 3 given things, which I'll go over when I show the code. So basically, what these will do, we'll put a for loop, and we need to give it 3 things. First, a variable that we're going to increment, either increase, decrease, whatever. Normally, it's going to be an integer, and the common naming convention is using I, j, or k. And then we're going to put a condition that I needs to fulfill, like I less than x. And then we need to put what we're going to change by I by every time we go through the loop. If we want to increase it by 1, we can just say I plus plus. If we want to increase it by 2, we can do I plus equals 2, and so on and so forth. And then whatever code you have in here, say print, let's say you were to print I, what this will do, it'll just go through this loop, print 0, 1, and 2. Won't print 3 because I wouldn't be less than it'd be equal to, and that's how that would work. But let's say you wanted to change 2 variables in relation to each other, like a combination. So you can put for loops inside of other for loops. So for example, after we do an I one, we could do for an integer j, and j goes up to whatever I is, and also increments by 1. And then we can just print out, say, I plus j. So in this case, your first one, I is going to be 0, j is going to be 0, but it won't be able to print out because j is not less than I, it's equal to. Then I will become 1, j will be 0, and it'll print out 1 plus 0. And then j won't become 1 because it's no longer less than I. Then once I is 2, j will be 0, and then it'll print this out. And then j will become 1, and then it'll print this out, and so on and so forth. You'll do the next I loop, all the j loops, and so on and so forth. That's just gonna keep going to whatever you have. But if you don't have a set amount of loops you want to do, and rather you want to do loops until you reach a certain requirement, you would use a while loop, which executes code in brackets as long as the statement in the parentheses is true. And it checks this statement every time it reaches the end bracket. So what we could do here is while x is less than 10, we're going to add 1 to x and print out x. So what this will do, it'll go in, increase x to 4, then print out 4. And then it's still less than 10, so it'll increase to 5 and print out 5, and so on and so forth until it reaches 9, until it reaches 10, prints out 10, and then once it gets here, this requirement isn't fulfilled, and it'll go here. Another way to use a while loop, which is useful in certain circumstances, is say while true, which this will run forever. So what we need to do is say we add 1 to x, and we'll say if x is then equal, you need 2 equal signs if you're putting an equal in an if statement. Once x is equal to 10, we will print out x. So this will run forever, but once it reaches 10, it'll print out x. And what we want to then do is break, which will end the loop and move on to whatever else we have. So that's all the material. I've posted problems in a Google Doc, which will be below this video. And I'm not going to really be able to reach because I'm going to be skiing. So there are some hints at the bottom of the Google Doc, and you can discuss amongst yourselves on the Discord server if I'm not available. And that should be it.